This is Love Never Fails with your host, Marilyn Redmond. Marilyn shares her experience, strength, and hope, and includes tools to help you find your inner strength for health, healing, and empowerment. So now, please welcome the host of Love Never Fails, Marilyn Redmond.
I am Marilyn Redmond. This is Love Never Fails. We are coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. And I'm so glad you're back with me again this week. We are just having a really good time here, learning new things that maybe you didn't hear other places, something exciting, something different. We have a wide range of topics, and we've been looking at holistic health lately. If you have a question, call in at 866-451-1451. And your questions can be about health, holistic health, or any question. If you have relationship problems or whatever, something troubling you, call in with your questions. We have people doing that, and join the crowd. So tell your friends and neighbors and all the people you see that you've been listening to Love Never Fails on Tuesday afternoons, and let them join us too. And as I mentioned, we're talking about holistic health these first few sessions on the air. And that means we're looking at health from a different point of view, one that addresses our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of our lives. Rather than focusing on the illness, which is typical and traditional, we don't look at the specific parts of, my hip hurts or my leg is giving me pain or I have a headache. We're looking at the whole interaction of all different characteristics and aspects of our lives and our health and energy inside. So this is nothing really new. It actually started over 2,500 years ago in China. We even had a Reiki master on a couple weeks ago. That's where it started, was also in Japan, where they changed the energy inside to produce health. Instead of taking something toxic outside as a medication, there is a way to change the inside. What can I change about me? I can change me, and that changes my reality. So when I do that, I become a healthier person, and we can grow into being whole and healthy and happy and take responsibility for whatever comes along in our life, and we're going to have a healthier life. So we're bringing balance and harmony into our lives rather than toxic substances. And if you have questions, call in at 866-451-1451. And we're going to talk about getting rid of some of the barriers to our health today, which emotionally can come from fear. And a lot of people, have been raised and conditioned because of our culture to be in fear. This has been going on for actually hundreds of years. If you look back in the things of how people were taught or how they led their lives, it was usually a reaction to fear. And when you come from a fearful point of view, you're going to have irrational, devastating results in your life. So we're talking about changing from fear to a different cause and effect. If we come from love, we're going to get rational, healthy, and productive results in our life. So let's take a look at what the fear does and help remove those necessary things that we think, we have to be in fear. No, we have a choice. And we can release it and bring in balance and harmony, which will create your health. Last week, we talked about affirmations, and that can bring health into your life because we've been taught to say, what's wrong with me when we go to the doctor? And in this program, we're saying, what's right with me? In fact, I had a meditation about a year ago, I guess at this point. And the silent voice inside said, Marilyn, there's nothing wrong with you, and there never was. You are a good person. And I've been trying to find those kinds of answers, those loving answers inside for many years through meditation. And that was a real big one for me, to hear that there was nothing wrong with me. I was raised in a dysfunctional family where I was the problem. And if everything went right, things would be wonderful, but, Marilyn did this or Marilyn did that, so all life's going down the tubes. So I was the one that was pointed at and made wrong in my family. And to find out spiritually that I am a good person, not only thinking that today through affirmations I can become a good person, but inside that's real. And it's because we are really like an iceberg with our emotions in our life. What you don't see about yourself is what's running your life. And I'm here to help you expose those hidden old emotions that are actually stopping the real true you from coming through, so you can wake up some morning or and begin meditation and say, there's nothing wrong with me. I am a good person, and release all those messages that stopped the good messages. So, today I woke up feeling for the first time in my life I was in reality. I did not wake up in a dark space where, it was kind of gloomy and what do I have to do today and trudge through it. And I woke up feeling, wow, I'm in joy, gratitude, in the presence of love. And that was one of our affirmations last week that I closed with. And you can keep saying that to yourself, and some morning you'll wake up saying, I'm in joy, gratitude, in the presence of love. So it's a matter of what we tell ourselves, but it's also what we tell ourselves affects our emotions. And if we tell ourselves, that this is going to be a terrible situation, guess what? It'll be a terrible situation. And then our feelings are the result of our thoughts. So thoughts can be changed, and we have a choice. And then when we have good thoughts and we do good actions, we get good feelings, and our feelings move up the ladder into the love and unconditional love that we are really trying to accomplish in our lives. So letting that fear go and understanding that we don't need to keep that fear in our lives, we can release it. We have a choice in our life to think differently, change our thoughts into new thoughts, like we talked about last week, and we can do that with our fear. If you think about maybe a story you had in your childhood that presented some fear and you still have it. In my case, I was about 5 years old in kindergarten, and my mother gave me a pair of mittens. It was cold winter that year. And she says, if you lose these mittens, you're never going to get another pair. Well, at our house, it was just after the Great Depression, and I was scared if I lost those mittens, that's the only pair I'm going to have. And it just held with me for years and years until I was cleaning out my closet the other day and discovered how many pairs of mittens and gloves I have. We compensate for those things that we think are missing in our lives. And guess what? I have quite a collection of gloves today, as you're all laughing. And it's because I'm trying to compensate. If I lost my gloves, I'll have another pair. And I have quite a few pairs at this point to replace the one I would lose. And the truth is, I never probably lost those mittens. And when I go to lose or misplace a glove today, I still go in. I'm not in fear about it like I was as a child, but I still have a little bit of a panic. Because where did I put them? I happen to have a pair I really, truly like right now. They're leather gloves, and they're terrific gloves. And I like every winter, they're just the kind I always my go-to gloves. And I misplaced them some time back. And I thought, oh my gosh, at least I have another pair in the closet. I know that I'll have a pair to replace them. And guess what? They showed up later down the pike. But I didn't have to go into fear, and I didn't have to panic about it. And we can change those emotions. And as we change our emotions, we move higher and higher to being a happier person. In my Paradigm Busters book, I have a chart of angels going up the stairs from our low feelings of fear, which is the basis of all our emotions, and going up into the higher emotions, which is unconditional love. So if you want to pick up one of my books like Paradigm Busters, Reveal the Real You, you'll get that chart too. I am Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails, and we are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio, and come back to hear more about how you can release your fear. I am your host, Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails. We are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio, and we're talking about fear today because it becomes a magnet, and it actually attracts what you don't want. There's something people don't understand often about fear. There's nothing outside of yourself that can give you peace. There's nothing outside of yourself that can save you. This is an inside job, people, and it is possible to change it. I have become fearless in my life. I'll tell you about that later in the program today. Paradigm Busters Reveal the Real You has a full chapter on holistic health. And if you really want to know more about it, you probably want to pick up my book and take a look at that. When I was teaching, one of the songs I used to teach to the kids was by Malvina Reynolds, and it was real popular in the college bracket at that time. She came around at the local university and had a program, and the songs she had were just really wonderful. And so I was teaching some of these to my classroom. I love to teach music. I was a music major. And the song was called Magic Penny. And it said, love is something if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Love is something if you give it away, you end up having more. It's just like a magic penny. Hold it tight and you won't have any. Lend it, spend it, and you'll have so many they'll roll all over the floor. And I was teaching that to the class that day, and this little boy who I knew was in a dysfunctional alcoholic home, I told him that day I said, Jed, go home and give yourself a big hug and say, I love myself. And I didn't think much about it, but I just was trying to encourage him because he really needed some support emotionally and lovingly. So he came running in the door the next morning. And he said, it worked. It felt so good. I says, what happened? And he says, I sang that song and I gave myself a big hug. And he said, I felt so good. And that's what we all want to do, is feel good. So we want to get rid of the fear and let that fear out into the light so it can dissipate. We don't have to keep it, and we can feel good. The fear is stopping it. It's like a black blanket, actually, covering our consciousness up so we can't move forward into the loving energy inside. And that's when you're like an iceberg. You don't know what's hidden below. And these fears are usually people don't even want to look at them. They just go around and pretend they're not there or drink to cover them up. Our other addictions will cover up your fears. When I was smoking, it was harder to quit smoking than it was alcohol or prescriptions because smoking covered up my fears really well. So I made a list of fears that you need to look at. Most people have the typical fears that you write down on an inventory and want to look at releasing. But there's also some fears that we don't always look at, such as fear of drowning, fear of men, fear of women, fear of being alone, fear of crying, fear of people, fear of fear. And if you remember, President Roosevelt said the only fear we have is the fear of fear. So there's a lot of fears we don't always look at. Fear of unknown, fear of abandonment. That's a big one for most people. Fear of intimacy is also another one. Fear of disapproval and rejection. I'm sure you've heard of all these fears. Maybe didn't think about identifying them in your life, but it is important. You have to consciously bring them out of that. Instead of being under the iceberg, bring them out into the sunlight. And then you can say, I don't choose to have that fear. Please release it and replace it with your love and grace, or however you want to let it go. You can write it on a balloon and let the balloon go up in the air and release the fear. Or you can write it into your list of fears and burn them so that they are then out in the ethers and no part of your consciousness anymore. You know, when I was learning about fear, one of the biggest fears I was told was speaking in front of public audiences. And for me, that wasn't a fear. I had been in front of the public since I was 3 years old on the stage of the Moore Theater in Seattle dancing. And I taught school and everything from kindergarten through college. So fear for me in playing a flute in front of, with an orchestra in front of a whole audience is soloing with a symphony. I've done a lot of what you might call scary things. But if you do it and you have an understanding that you're performing and they're the ones listening, there doesn't have to be a big fear. Another one is the fear of dying. And when you start to become a spiritual person, you realize that your spirit lives forever. We just keep coming back and learning how to get rid of more and more fear so we can have that space open up and have more and more love in our lives. It's really like, you know, today happens to be the garbage day at my house. So you take out the garbage and you put in a new plastic liner for the can in the kitchen so you can just fill it up again. And when you take the fear out or the baggage from the past out and release it, you have an empty space to fill up with the love that's been missing. So you're clearing out what you don't want for what you do want. It's also like when you put a bouquet of flowers into a vase, and after the water has gotten pretty murky from the flowers being in the water, you've got to dump out the old water, and you add fresh water for the flowers to continue soaking up the water it needs so they can stay fresh and nice. So you're getting rid of what you don't want, and the fears are stopping that love we talked about in Magic Penny. So as you release it, it leaves a space. And if you don't change that and consciously do it, I suggest writing them on paper and actually maybe telling somebody, you know, this was a fear I had, but I'm going to replace it with love and grace or some other thing. What I was told in meditation was we want to put in that empty space what you do want, because something else will come in and then you got to remove it, and whatever comes in, you got to remove it. So just releasing it without what you want to replace it with is kind of takes extra time to get where you're trying to go. So what I've discovered is I'm building a love-based life today instead of a fear-based life. Most of my fears came from my childhood because it was dysfunctional, alcoholic, and mentally ill. And a lot of fears of how was I going to take care of myself. They weren't there for me. How was I going to get food? How was I going to eat? All those things children need to have a nurturing life I didn't necessarily have. And so we're going to come back in just a few minutes and find out how a fear really affected a person's health drastically. So stay tuned. I'm Marilyn Redmond. I'm the host of Love Never Fails, and we are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. I am your host, Marilyn Redmond. This is Love Never Fails. We are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio, and we're learning more about fear today. And if you haven't really thought about it before, it's probably running at least one part of your life that you probably are not getting the results you want. You know, actually, fear becomes a magnet, and it actually attracts to us what we don't want. And it's, if you think of your life as maybe a thermometer, the old thermometer that had the mercury inside, and it went up higher and higher as you got sicker and sicker. And that gave you feedback that things weren't well. Well, our feelings give us feedback that things aren't well, and feelings come from our emotions. Most people don't realize that you can change your emotions, and that's what we're talking about today. We're wanting that thermometer mercury to rise up higher and not stay in the low energy that does produce a lack of good health. So our emotions are telling us who and where we are in our life, but our feelings show us where we are that particular day or time or experience. So when you want to have good feelings, then take good, healthy behavior action that will provide good feelings, and your energy, your emotions can go up the thermometer. You can rise into that unconditional love. It's your choice to do that. Your actions will give you good feelings if they're good actions. And if they're not rational actions, if they're coming from fear, actually you dig the hole deeper. I quit digging the hole, and I don't have the same results that I used to have. Some people say fear is false emotion appearing real, and that's because those low energies are not reality. But we have been trained to look at that. We've been taught that what's ever going on is going to be your situation, and there's no way you can change it. But we're here today to say, yes, you can. You can have that choice to change your feelings, change your actions, and you'll get better feelings. In fact, if you don't change that fear, you're going to have insanity, illness, or traumatic situations from irrational behavior. If you move into loving responses for whatever happens in your life. You'll have good feelings, and your life will really start to improve and go up that scale with the mercury in the thermometer. So learning to respond in love is the answer. And as we do that, things actually improve. I have a story I wanted to share with you about Anita Moriani, because I just think this story really impressed me and really brought it home to me how our feelings really can affect our lives. She was a lady who was born in Singapore, I believe. She's Indian family, Indian country of her parents were from. She was in the professional world doing very well. Then her friends started getting cancer, and she literally had 3 friends within a short period of time die of cancer. Scared the heck out of her. If 3 of my friends at her young age could die of cancer, what was going to happen to her? So she became very curious, very focused, and did a lot of research about cancer. Over the time of her studying cancer and trying to become more educated about it, she got very sick. Guess what? With cancer. It got so bad in her life that she had to give up her job, ended up in a wheelchair, just barely a few days left, supposedly, as far as the doctors were thinking that she was going to maybe, survive. It was really close to death's door. She had a near-death experience during this period of time, and what she found out was that what you focus on grows, and that becomes your emotional basis for your life. And if it's, of course, in fearful getting cancer, she, like a magnet, she attracted it to her because that's where her fear was. And that's important to know, that we don't have to have these illnesses. We can focus on our healthy being and claim our healthy being. I have affirmations in my Paradigm Busters book for health. We can claim our health every day. We were created in good health, and it's only the emotional basis of our life and lack of positive affirmations that bring on illness. So we need to know how that works in our life, and so we can change it. Fears in my life brought on some pretty interesting experiences. I had a car stolen. I had been teaching a class that morning at a Seattle University on Edgar Cayce, and then that afternoon I was to speak at the Near-Death Studies for Association. And I came out from the parking lot of my speech that afternoon from sharing about my near-death experience, and the car was gone. And oh my gosh, what was I going to do? I was divorced. I didn't have a husband with a car I could use for backup, for wheels to get me to a grocery store or where I needed to be. And there I was stranded, out of town, in fact. So someone from the program stayed with me while I contacted the police. It just so happened my boyfriend had driven in to be there at the afternoon program, so he took me home, thank goodness. And there I am wondering, what am I going to do for a car? I'm heading for Europe in that week. How would I get to the airport, etc.? So it was a real dilemma. While I'm in Paris, I get a call from the police. They found the car. Hoodlums in that area had taken it and smoked pot and cut up the leather seats and caused a lot of havoc. And when the gas was empty, they quit driving it and left it. So when I got home for my trip, I called the insurance company, and they fixed it up just like new. It was wonderful. And so in my meditation, I said, well, what's this about? And they said, well, Marilyn, you had listed all your fears trying to release them, and you forgot the one about your car being stolen, that it would leave you without transportation. So that was even a bigger way to say, okay, I still have to search out any other fears I still haven't thought about. And as I was driving to Boise one Thanksgiving to visit my grandchildren for the Thanksgiving weekend, and I had known that I was going to be going over passes of mountains to get there, so I got myself some chains. And I never used chains before, and they sold me a set of not the regular typical chains, but they had kind of it was a temporary type of set of chains. They were experimenting with, and there were wires in them instead of just the chain metal. And so guess what? I got a flat tire from these new chains, and there I was stranded on the interstate trying to get across the mountains. And I'll tell you the rest of the story, because with my fear, God came in, an angel showed up. I'll tell you more of it after the break. I am Marilyn Redmond. I am on Love Never Fails, and we are coming to you from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. I am your host, Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails. We're having a great time on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio, and we're learning more about fear today. And I was in the middle of a story about me going to Boise for Thanksgiving dinner and that weekend holiday to be with my grandchildren. And there I was with a flat tire along Highway 5, just north of Pendleton, Oregon, and I live in Washington. So I'd gotten over the Cascades. I'd gotten that far before the tires started to go flat from these crazy chains they'd sold me. There I was stranded. And in those days on the news, there'd been several reports of single women stranded on the interstate with some not very good results of what had happened. And so, that the news really gives us fear. And so I immediately thought, oh, here I am, stranded on the interstate. This is before cell phones, and there's not a house in sight. There's not a town in sight. It is flat ground of nothing. How in the heck was I going to get help? I was not panicking, but I was really concerned about what was I going to do. I had driven as far as I could on the tire and knew anything more would be a disaster. So trying to get to Pendleton. And all of a sudden, I went into peace. And this gentleman, older fellow, drove up in a little compact truck and pulled up off the road and said, well, ma'am, he says, I'm retired and I have this extra job I have to get there, but do you need help? And I said, well, yes, I do. I would not normally take a ride from a stranger. I think that's the only time I ever did in my life. But I said yes, and I went into this piece. And so he took me to the local tire dealer in Pendleton. And he said, they'll be able to help you. He says, I can't help you. I have to go on to work, but I'll get you to where you can get help. And I walked into the main office, the main lobby, and here's a whole room full of people waiting for their tires to be put on, for their snow tires because the snow's coming. People waiting for their chains to be put on because they want their chains on for the snow. And there I am waiting in line with all these people, would obviously going to be ahead of me. And I got up to the counter and I said, I need to get over the Blue Mountains before dark. I'm heading for Boise. And I didn't tell them I'd had a panic situation years earlier in those mountains at night, and I was no way going to go over those mountains in the dark. So the man looked at me and he said, if you don't tell anybody in this room, we're taking you next so you can get over the mountains. We'll do you next and you'll be on your way. So I turned around to thank the man that brought me to Les Schwab tire store, and he was gone. Now, I've had another angel experience in physical form, and when you turn around to thank them, they're gone. This man, he wasn't leaving the room, he wasn't walking away, he wasn't going out the door, he just wasn't there. And so it took me a while to understand that had been an angel. So when we go into fear, believe it or not, you're taken care of in ways you might not even understand or have thought about. In that case, I didn't know those things could happen, but they can happen. We don't have to live in fear. We're taken care of spiritually all the time. So when I realized, the fear wasn't really necessary, didn't mean I was totally fearless. I did have an experience come up a couple years ago where my boyfriend wanted to go up in the big Ferris wheel in downtown Seattle. And it's really huge. And I'd had a panic attack in an octopus in 6th grade. And they saw how panicked I was and stopped the ride immediately and took me out. I was afraid I was going to fall out of the ride and go splat onto the ground and there'd be no more Marilyn. And I just really went out of, lost it as far as, I was scared. And so when it came to going on a Ferris wheel that was actually umpteen times bigger than this little circus ride, there was no way I was going up there. And told my boyfriend, no, about 5, 6 times. I said, you're not getting me up there. And so I called my spiritual teacher and told her I was having trouble with this. And she says, oh, I'll hypnotize you and you'll be able to go up. And I thought, well, if she's my teacher, right? If I know what to do, I can take care of it myself. So I meditated. And I found out, of course, it was this octopus ride in 6th grade is where the fear came from. And so I visualized and put myself in the arms of God. And I felt safe. And when I saw my boyfriend the next time, I says, oh, by the way, if you still want to go up in the Ferris wheel, I'll go up with you. And he looked at me like, where are you coming from? So I did. I went with him. We went up in the Ferris wheel. I felt perfectly safe. And as we were going up in the Ferris wheel, I wanted pictures, but we got there later in the day than we planned. And it was not a very good day for pictures. And I thought, oh gosh, this is a bummer. But as we got higher and higher in that Ferris wheel, the sun came out for a sunset. It was beautiful. It was orange. The whole sky was orange, and it reflected on the water of Puget Sound. It reflected on the office buildings behind us on the glass windows. It was all over orange. It was gorgeous. I got my pictures. It became the cover of Paradigm Busters. So when you see the orange sky, that was the day I got rid of my last fear, and I have become fearless. Well, I've learned that fear is like a boogeyman. And if you really think about what Edgar Cayce says, he says, mind is the builder, physical is the result, and spirit is the source. So if I changed my mind to being protected in that situation, and I felt actually very comfortable with the idea of going up, waiting for the Ferris ride to be our turn, and spirit is the source. Spirit's always with us. So I did that, and I found that it was a really exciting, wonderful experience to go up in that Ferris wheel. I'd conquered my last fear. I don't have to have fear in my life today. I've become fearless, and through my thinking and my spiritual connections. And what I've come to understand is fear's like a little kid. And you're in a dark bedroom at night, and you call out to your mommy and daddy, there's a boogeyman in here. So your parents come to the door and say, well, there's no boogeyman. And you turn on the light, the parents turn on the light, and the little boy says, well, he's under the bed. And of course, there's no boogeyman under the bed. You pull up the blankets, and there's nothing there. The light shines under there. There's nothing there. You open the closet door. There's no boogeyman in the closet door because the light now shines in the closet. So if you're ready to grow out of the boogeyman, out of the fear, and turn the light on, what happens when you walk into a dark room and turn on the light? That's what we're doing. We're turning on the light today. You don't have to live in fear. And that's really important to know, that you don't have to live in fear. Because now you can give love. And I always thought I was a loving mother. I tried to do the right things. I tried to be there for my children. They ate. We had a clean house. I got them to their activities. They did what they were supposed to be doing and learning and having their experiences. And I was giving them the fear I had as a child until I cleaned it all out. And there's a song by Oscar Hammerstein that's in The Sound of Music. I love his lyrics. This man must have been very spiritual and understood these dynamics. Because in the song, You Are 16, the lyrics say, love is not love until you give it away. So I had to learn, when I released my fear, I could finally give my family the love I wanted them to have. But it had been stopped by the fear of my growing up in my childhood, and I don't have to live as a little kid. I can let that fear go, and I can grow up past the fear and become a mature person. And we'll talk more about a chart about fear when we come back after the break, so you'll understand what's really going on. Stay tuned. I'm Marilyn Redmond. You're listening to Love Never Fails, and we are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. I am your host, Marilyn Redmond. You're listening to Love Never Fails. We are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. And I was sharing with you my stories about fear. And there's a chart that used to be a newspaper for children when I taught school called the Weekly Reader. And there was a chart in that Weekly Reader right on the front page one particular week. I wish I had kept it because then I'd have more of the details. However, what it basically said, it listed all the different fears that children have. Isn't that great for a Weekly Reader to put out for the kids? And what it told them was what ages they would outgrow that fear. And it dawned on me that you're a little kid if you stay in fear. You get to outgrow the fears. You grow into the love and the light of the reality. Love is reality, and you don't have to stay in the darkness where the boogeyman is. So that chart told me that we could outgrow the fear. And what I know today is that fear knocked at the door and faith answered. No one was there. So you're actually walking in faith when you don't have fear. So what I did on the Ferris wheel situation, I substituted faith for fear. And that's what I do today. If I get myself even into anxiety and changing, my life right now is going through a lot of changes, and I've had some anxiety of new things, new experiences I haven't done before. And when I got a little anxious or full of anxiety, I said, okay, I've got to get back in faith. And so I choose to be in the arms of love, arms of God, however you want to describe that. And I choose to be in faith, and I don't have to walk in fear. I can move forward in the faith of God, or however your higher power is for you, as far as how you define that. So, faith is actually a very wonderful way to have your life because you don't have to have the fear anymore. And what I found out from that ride when the sky turned orange, orange is the color of Christ consciousness. Now, we've been taught that only one person could achieve that, but I've discovered Christ consciousness means you have grown up, you have matured. You are coming from unconditional love instead of criticism and judgment and sarcasm. You are coming from a higher consciousness of love. You have grown out of your childhood. And that's what we're doing on planet Earth. We're moving into that loving situation where we don't have to react like little kids. We get to move into healthy, functional ways of dealing with our life. And that's unconditional love. So when you learn to do the right thing in spite of the fear, then you get joy and you move into the joy of life. And it feels really good to be in a joyful life rather than a fearful life. In my case, I've had both. I'll choose joy any day. And I do the actions today that make that possible, to raise my consciousness out of the depression, the dark energies, or the negative comments. And a lot of people are still in denial, and denial is not a river in Egypt. When you don't accept the truth or accept the reality of love in your life, you're in denial. And that stops it from happening. So when we're willing to change, we're willing to see new ways to handle our lives, we're willing to open up and open our hearts to that love inside and let it fill us and be there for us. In my experience, I went to see a movie called The Beautiful Mind, and it put me right back into paranoid schizophrenia like my mother was. That was familiar at our household. And my boyfriend was a very healthy person at the time. We're still together now. But at that time, we saw the movie, but I was new in the relationship. And I took myself home that night because all of a sudden, in my fearful way of living my life, I couldn't be around a healthy, loving person. It was like oil and vinegar. I got myself home very quickly. I'm getting out of Dodge. And I had to go back. My friend said, go back. You're going to learn how to be around a healthy person. So there is some adjustments we have to go through to learn to have love in our lives. It took me 3-4 months of being in a different comfort zone, putting myself in faith, knowing I'm okay, I'm safe. I know he's not going to hurt me. I know things are going to go smoothly. He's always been very comforting and wonderful and supportive. So I knew nothing was going to go wrong if I opened up my heart to the love and could let that in. And actually, in the last 17 years, I've been in that relationship, and it's helped me outgrow the fear. And next week, we're going to talk about angers and resentments. So if you want to outgrow all of these things and grow up in your life, Herbert Spencer, I'll read a quote from him. There is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. So what I know is when I started to inquire and open up my mind to love, I finally could actually have it come into my life. I investigated it, tried it out little by little with a little more faith here, a little more faith there, until I just discovered, well, 100% faith works the best. Might as well go for it. And Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. So I've learned to think for myself. I don't listen to the news and the propaganda that's out there. I don't pay attention to a lot of things that are going on today. I listen to that guidance and love of the inner voice inside that is the truth. And the truth sets me free when I know the truth. The words aren't going to set me free. I have to apply them into my life and act on them, and I feel good, just like that little boy. I love that Penny song, Magic Penny. He felt good when he hugged himself and sang that to himself. So we can do that too. We can hug ourselves, give ourselves a big hug, and say, I'm growing up beyond my fears. I'm maturing, and I don't need to believe in what's wrong. I can look for what's right, and what I focus on grows. My life is growing into bigger and better things every day. And I am very happy today to say that this is the healthiest I've ever been in my life. And I've had all kinds of illnesses and problems to deal with from my dysfunctional background. But life is worth living, and we have a choice to do that. So we'll be back, and we're going to have another little story. Don't leave before you hear the story. I am Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails. This is Love Never Fails on BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. I am Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails. We are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. And we are talking about fear today. We're talking about how to release it, how to remove it, write it down, and share it with a person, put it on a balloon, put it in your God box. If you have a box where all those fears can go in, and let God have them, or let some loving being, a higher power, take away the fear, because the light will shine it away, and move up that ladder into an unconditional love that you were born in and created for, to enjoy life. Life is to enjoy and be past those barriers that we had. And another reason for fear sometimes is the fear of the unknown. And you know what I discovered? Fear is a lack of knowledge. And today I use my meditation and spiritual connections with the other side, and I get those answers today. I don't have to have a lack of information. Our culture has been actually misinformed. Information has been adjusted, changed, ignored, omitted. We do not have all the information, and we stay in fear. So as you get more answers, there's less and less fear. There's nothing to be afraid of. The boogeyman is no longer there. I've learned that the fear was more important at one point in my life, and what I wanted was very important, to kind of take the place of what would comfort me, a better house, a better car, looking good in the neighborhood, whatever, because I wanted to be important and look good. And today, material values are not so important. I've replaced them with the spiritual gifts of joy, happiness, prosperity, and I leave the fear behind. And it's not the material things, it's the inside of me that feels good, and that's the freedom from fear. So through faith, I have a connection with the loving universe that supports me in all things. I cannot have faith and fear at the same time. And it's more important to have health today than to keep the fear. And those are the basis for our illnesses, according to Louise Hay, which we shared her book the other day. So as I move out of my fear, I'm going to be a happier person. I saw a really cute video on Facebook this morning about a little dog that was in the where you go to take your animals dog shelter if you don't have a reason to keep your dog and he needs a new home. And this dog was in the shelter, very depressed and forlorn, and somebody came along and wanted this doggy, and he was having to adjust to come out of his little container, his cage. And as he came out of that cage, he was so frisky and so happy of what he was going to be adopted. Get yourself out of the cage of fear. Be that little dog they called Benny, and just see how happy you can be to be out in the real world with all the light and love around you, and know that you are loved and always have been loved. And you don't have to stay in that prison or that little dog shelter of fear anymore. You have a choice to leave the fear behind and move into the love of the universe. And I want you to know that you can check out my website at angelicasgifts.com. My books are at amazon.com. My blog is marilynredmondbooks.blogspot.com. And check out my YouTube interviews and lectures and spiritual information. I just put up some new ones. And next week, we're going to talk about anger and resentments and how that affects your life. So we're glad that you were here today. And I am your host, Marilyn Redmond, coming to you from BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. For love never fails. And we'll see you next week, finding out more about ourselves every time. Keep coming back. Have a good afternoon.
You've been listening to Love Never Fails with your host, Marilyn Redmond. Go beyond old ideas and understandings and hear Marilyn's solutions to healing and a higher consciousness. Each week, here on Marilyn Redmond's Love Never Fails.